Hey everybody, good morning. It is good to see all of you gathered this morning for this chance we have to be together. I encourage you to comment all morning, share your greetings, that God may bless us through this time with community, that we may learn to grow in love of God and neighbor together. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Hey, so today I want to loop back to something that we've been talking about for quite a while. We've been talking about Matthew 25 and the scripture that we base our ministries on as we reach out into our neighborhood and into our community. Hi, Daisy and Karen and Rodney. It's good to see all of you, and Mary. I want to loop back to that a little bit and talk more about Jesus as the shepherd. So last Sunday, I talked about Jesus' very first thoughts about seeing people and how, hi Deb, even though they were tired, he and his disciples, they decided to continue on with people because they needed shepherding. And I talked a lot about how the shepherding that was supposed to be happening of that day, like with Herod, was terrible. And the shepherding of the scribes and the Pharisees and the religious leaders was also not appropriate and good. So Jesus steps up as the good shepherd and sets an example as such. And so I want to go back to where we were 2 weeks ago again and talk about John chapter 10. And this is that story where Jesus heals the blind man with spit and mud in his eyes. And then the Pharisees, the religious leaders, go crazy because he healed the blind man in the wrong way and on the wrong day, on the Sabbath. And so the Pharisees question and push this blind man around and then basically kick him out. And here is how Jesus responds to this whole scene. He says in John chapter 10, "Very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate but climbs in by some other way is a thief and a robber." Think about those words for a minute, thief and a robber, okay? "The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice." Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore, Jesus said again, "Very truly, I tell you, I am the gate." It's also translated door. "I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers." Take note of that right there. All? "But the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. A thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." Jesus is going on and on about these thieves and robbers and how he's the gate and the door. He continues, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then when the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it, the man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep." Jesus says again, "I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father." The Jews who heard these words were again divided. Many of them said, He is demon-possessed and raving mad. Why listen to him?" But others said, "These are not the sayings of a man possessed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind?" So Jesus is really going on at length here about being a good shepherd and not being a thief or a robber. He's drawing a clear distinction between good shepherding and entering in love with people and people who try to sneak in and gain access to the people and the kingdom in other ways, try to steal things away. I want to talk at length about this idea of thieves and robbers today. There's this beautiful picture. I've seen it before. I had to go searching for it, and I don't know who produced it. Hi, John. Hi, Pam. Hi, Ron and Sue. Hi, Marcia. But it's a picture that somebody drew of a sheep pen, and this is supposedly pretty historical. And then there's that picture of the shepherd sitting right down here at the bottom. You see that? This is the idea behind this passage for many people. They see Jesus as the one who allows them in and then protects them as they stay inside. And then in the daytime, Jesus lets them out into pasture to feed, but overnight, Jesus protects them in the pasture. And so when he's talking about thieves and robbers, he's talking about people who try to sneak in any other way except for through the gate. And Jesus defines himself as the gate. So let's talk about why. But first, who is Jesus talking about when he refers to thieves and robbers? Well, He says very clearly that all those who have gone before were thieves and robbers. This is another example of how you cannot take everything in the Bible black and white literally. You can't, because if that's true, then is Moses a thief and a robber? Because he was gone, he went before, right? And people listened to him and followed him. Was Elijah a thief and a robber? No, probably not. How about John the Baptist? He's gone before Jesus. Was he a thief and a robber too? How about Mary, his mother? Was Mary a thief and a robber? No. So Jesus probably doesn't mean everyone who's gone before. He might just be talking about that immediate circumstance and time. All right, so who else might Jesus be talking about as thieves and robbers if he's talking right in that context? Could he be referring to Judas? Some people say it's Judas Iscariot who's going to betray him, but that's probably not right either. Because why would Jesus all of a sudden, having this conversation with a blind man and Pharisees and scribes, start talking about something that's going to happen later with Judas? We don't know, but that's probably not quite right either. So the very literal interpretation and the forward thinking, metaphorical thinking may not quite be the right thing either. Some say Jesus is talking about Satan here, who is the thief and the robber. However, that's not likely at all. There's this really great article by Gary Manning Jr. It's called Misinterpreting the Thief, referring to this very passage in John 10:10. And he really does some extensive work. I think Michael will probably share that link with you in a second here. Yep, thank you. Perfect timing. This is not likely. The thief and the robber in this passage who comes to steal and destroy and all of that is probably not Satan. He writes in his article, this line of questioning confirms that the thief does not refer to Satan. Thief is never used as a metaphor for Satan in the Old Testament or the New Testament or in any other ancient Jewish literature. Thief and bandit are referred to as other things, usually the Jewish ruling priests. And this is true in Isaiah 1:23, Jeremiah 2:26, 7:11, 23:30, and 20 other ancient Jewish documents. So is this passage talking about Satan? No. The reason we make it about that is, once again, as we've been talking about for a very long time here, there's a whole system built around your eternal salvation, whether you go to heaven or hell. And if they make this passage about Satan as a thief or robber, that confirms that belief system again. In fact, read this article if you want, because this writer questions that whole thing. Why do preachers keep preaching that the thieves and robbers in this passage are Satan? Because they're not. And it's probably just because somebody at some point said it and everybody just believes what somebody else said. But if you do the research, it's not there. Really considering the context, the thieves and robbers can only be the scribes and the Pharisees. Because if you look at John chapter 9, they're the ones who, remember, criticized Jesus for healing a blind man in the wrong way on the wrong day and eventually throwing the blind man back out. Watch the sermon from a couple weeks ago if you're more curious about that. It had to have been the scribes and the Pharisees. Now imagine what it must have been like for them to be hearing your thieves and robbers, although apparently they didn't even really understand what he was saying. And here's what I wonder, why? Why did Jesus call them thieves and robbers, and why did they not understand? See, in this passage here, I really want to offer the scribes and the Pharisees some grace. These were people who had been raised to believe that the Sabbath was a day that you didn't do anything like healing. Certainly not. You didn't do any work, so you certainly didn't do any healing. And they had upheld this tradition for a very, very long time. They thought that what they were doing was being faithful to God. They may have intended to love God. They thought that by upholding the rules and making sure everybody obeyed appropriately, that was how they were loving God and loving neighbor. Because, people have to obey God in order to gain God's favor. They honestly probably thought that this was how to do it. The problem is that their love for God over time got clouded by other motives. because the Pharisees also wanted to be right. They wanted their position. They were in charge of things. They wanted power and they wanted control. And they certainly didn't want somebody like Jesus messing it all up. Some grubby guy out of Bethlehem? Seriously? Born to a carpenter? No, this wasn't possible. So although they wanted to love God, and they truly, I believe, thought that what they were doing was the right thing, their motives were clouded by their own desires and their own intentions. Ultimately, the scribes and Pharisees and Sadducees too, they had divided hearts. Divided hearts. I'm going to say this a lot today. It really matters. Divided hearts. And this is something that we all know about. We know that this happens because we have seen it across history and across Christianity. People who start out maybe with the very best of intentions and intend totally pure God-loving things and community-loving things, and all of that end up doing things that are quite different than what they started. Their motives get mixed up. I want to know if any of you have considered this, because although we fully intend to love God together as a community, it is very easy to develop a divided heart. In fact, I think we have to constantly be guarding against divided hearts. And we're all going to have it. We just have to be aware that sometimes our motives aren't going to quite be as loving if we're not very cautious about our division in our hearts. Let me say more about this. I think you'll get me by the end of this if you're not yet, okay? Has anybody watched this documentary on, I believe it's available on Amazon Prime, or read anything about it? If you don't have access to Amazon Prime and you can't watch it, read about it, please. It's called Shiny Happy People, of course, with the Duggar family secrets. And some of you might recognize this more when I tell you it's from that show 19 Kids and Counting, which was on TLC a long, long time ago. A lot of people love that show. Those children all always looked so perfect. I don't know about you. I raised 2 kids, and I mean, you practically, I don't know, you mean, how did they even get them all in this picture to smile like that? Well, as it turns out, what was happening in that Duggar family was a whole lot of abuse, a lot of exploitation for the sake of money, for television, for all sorts of things. And this might have started out as a beautiful idea, raise a family, care for them, homeschool them, guide them in the ways of your faith and your belief. But it clearly turned into something really, really awful. Watch the documentary, read about it, learn more about the resource of this, because although their intention was to raise their kids with loving hearts for God, their hearts were divided. I have no doubt about it. And we have seen this happen all over the place. Think of priests who perpetrated horrible crimes. Although their intent was to love God, somehow they got pulled into something that wasn't so good, that really created problems. The damage done by church people and church leaders allowing the division in their hearts to actually drive their way of doing things is incredible. Divided hearts. We're all prone to having divided hearts. And I believe the scribes and the Pharisees had divided hearts here too, because they wanted to love God, but they actually loved their position and their power and their desire to be right, maybe just a little bit more, which is why they couldn't hear Jesus at all. Not at all. Their hearts were divided. Their motivation was more about themselves in the end. This is a tough word today. Listen to me. I mean, if you remember a time when your church or our church or whatever church looked like this, when everybody was singing and everything was full, and how good it felt to stand in a congregation and everybody's voices, your hair practically, blown forward by it, and the choir was just magnificent. Oh, there were so many people. How many of you remember a time like this? We begin to really think of that as the glory days of the church, and we associate loving God with having a big fat full church, right? And so when things start to look more like this, on some Sundays, we get really, really anxious. And instead of just continuing to love God in whatever way we can, our hearts begin to divide. We start thinking, we've got to get more people in here. And then when people show up to church, and if our hearts are divided that way, worrying about the future of our church so much, then we start having ulterior motives when we meet people. Rather than loving them, we start thinking, look, you guys, it's a family. And then we start saying, they have children. We need children. Let's go get the children. There's nothing wrong with being welcoming. Don't get me wrong. But when our motivations shift from being loving to being, we got to get those people in here, then we got a problem. Our hearts become divided. We start saying, it's a family. Let's get him. They have kids. Let's get them. But our motives matter, because people can tell when your motive is not quite love, when you've got something else in your mind. Now today we're going to be sharing a letter with all of you in our congregation and everybody involved. So if you're involved in the church and in any way, if you receive emails from the church, you'll get this letter from me today, from us today. It'll actually come from Tammy. And it's a financial report about what's happening here at Coon Rapids UMC. I never preach about this stuff. This is a very awkward thing for me. And you know I never preach about this stuff. And I've been very anxious about talking about this at all today. But I need to talk with you about it because, yes, we are at a difficult point financially. We've received a lot of benefit from COVID-19 help. And it has carried us through to this season now. It has allowed the development and growth of Matthew 25 food distribution, which frankly is the growing edge here. More people get involved with Matthew 25 here than anything else, and it is a beautiful growing community. But as this church sort of transitions from a traditional way of expecting resource and income and money to a different model where resources come from multiple places. Many churches have done this for a long time. We're just moving there now. We're in this strange space of, are we going to have enough savings to get us to the next place? This is relevant to this sermon because it would be very easy for our hearts to become divided right now. And we do not want to become like the scribes and Pharisees with our hearts divided. And Jesus calling thieves and robbers. I want to talk about this more fully. You're going to see this in this letter. This is a chart we have in there. I'm not going to talk about all of that right now, but I want you to read this letter. If you'd like access to this letter and you are not a part of our email group, please reach out to me. I hope, Michael, would you share my email address, and also Tammy@CoonRapidsUMC.org, and we'll add you to the list, no problem. If you want to see what's happening with our church financially, that would help you. And Matthew 25, it's all the same group. But here's what I want to talk about with this, because what happens when churches start thinking more about preserving their institution, their organization, then our hearts can become divided so quickly. So just like when we see that family and we go, look, it's a family with kids. And then we look at this and say, look, it's a kid. We actually have this idea that having more kids in the building will help us pay our bills. It probably won't. Isn't this a funny picture? When was the last time you saw a kid putting a $20 bill in an offering plate wearing a sweater like that? We could start thinking, Jesus wants us to get more people in our church. We get anxious about our future. And then we start prioritizing money over people. We stop looking at people and saying, who are you? How are you? How can I love you? And we start immediately thinking, what can you do to help us survive? Oh, you were a teacher? Great. Let's get you in Sunday school. Oh, you have financial means? Great. Here's an offering envelope. There's nothing wrong with any of this. But I want you to understand something. If we're going to love people and we're going to represent Jesus with love, just as Jesus lived as a good shepherd who was loving all the way, we need to be careful of our ulterior motives. There's nothing wrong with wanting to have a strong and healthy church, especially if we believe that that's the way to help people understand the love of God. But in this current culture, helping people understand the love of God has to be more outside of these walls than has been in the past. Because there are a whole lot of people out there who have learned their lesson from the ulterior motives of church people and church leaders. We have to re-earn trust, and that may never fill the pews again. Loving Jesus is more important. We have to be careful because our motives could so easily get twisted so that even though we want to love neighbor, we really mostly love just our church. And when our church needs money, we begin to see everybody and everything through the eyes of church money. We might begin to prioritize people who dress nicer than those who are in need. We might begin to prioritize people with children because we've decided that children will build the church again, rather than just loving whoever we meet. Do you see what I'm saying? I want to tell you, years ago, this happened to me. My ex-husband and I were living in Lubbock, Texas. And we visited a church in that area in Lubbock one Sunday because I'd all of a sudden decided, I miss church. And we went to this church, and it was the strangest experience ever. Somebody heard me singing, and you all know I'm a musician. And, well, number one, we were young people. And I guess we were dressed fairly well for their crowd. And then they heard me singing, and they realized that I was a musician. And then before we left that day, we probably had 30 people doing a big, loving pig pile upon us, figuratively. I had a choir folder in my hand. I was invited to sing in the choir. My ex-husband was invited to join the men's group. I mean, it felt like they were just attacking us. We went back one more Sunday and didn't go back again. They showed up at our house and asked us why we hadn't come back. And I was honest and said, I just felt overwhelmed by all of the attention. And the response was this: well, we just haven't had that many young people come in lately, and we know we need young people to survive. I didn't feel valued or loved or cared about in any way. And at that time, we were a long way from home in Lubbock. What I needed was a loving church. That's what I needed. I needed a community of faith. I didn't need an organization that just wanted to suck something out of me. I needed to be loved. Motive matters, you guys. Your motive matters, my motive matters. Because of all the good intentions to love neighbor, if we're really just trying to get something out of them, people will catch on. You can tell when somebody just wants something from you rather than just wants to know you, can't you? Motive matters. See, I believe this is what Jesus was talking about when he was speaking to the Pharisees. He was trying to tell people, these religious leaders are trying to scam you. They want you to obey because they want whatever they have had to continue. They want their power and their position to continue, but they've lost track of loving. I'm here to change that. Do things with me and through me, and life will be different now. We can't have ulterior motives without people catching on. We all have to deal with this because loving God is more important. And loving God and loving neighbor is the core elemental thing we must do, no matter what God decides to do with any church organization. No matter what happens to any church building, loving God and loving neighbor is it. It is the priority. I don't know how you could read Jesus any other way. He makes it perfectly clear. I want you to look at these words in Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. You don't have to say the word money here. You could say anything. Look at the Pharisees. They're not able to serve two masters. They're serving their law. They're serving their position, their religion, their rules, and they thought they were serving God by doing that. And if they were going to serve that master the way they thought of it, they would not be able to honor Jesus, hear Jesus, or even think of Jesus as being okay, because those two things ultimately conflicted. If they were going to love people, they were going to have to let go of some of the things, all of the things they thought they had to have. No one can serve two masters. Yeah, Mary, we want to see a return on the investment. Yes. We get asked all the time this weird question. Well, how many people who come to the Friday food giveaway or the drive-thru have come to church on Sunday? And it's so hard to answer because what we say is, well, they came to church. Didn't they? But what they're talking about is get them into worship and get them giving and putting money in the offering plate. Get them to join the church and then get them to volunteer. But these are people that just need to be loved. And if someday they decide to come in the church, great. But our job is to love, and not try to trick anybody. People will recognize it if we do. And it won't earn anybody's trust. It'll tell them, oh, here we go again. No one can serve two masters. Loving God matters. Serving people with love matters because motive matters. Our priorities need to be as clear as possible all the time. Look again at these words from 1 John 4, 7 through 12. No, look at these. Sorry, I haven't shown you them yet today. Dear friends, let us love one another. For love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God because, here it is, God is love. It does not say God is love and rules and position and priority and church systems. It does not say that God is church buildings. It says that God is love. That's the number one thing. God is love. Continues, this is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, love is made complete in us. Say that with me. Love is made complete in us. And you know what, guys? Love complete is all anybody needs. It's all you need, and it's all I need. It's being whole and healed and reconciled and holy. Love made complete in us. If we love one another, that is what we can share and what we can live ourselves. Yeah, I know that song too. There's an old thing that people do where they insert the word love in place of the name of God. If God is love, then you can do that. And it's done often in 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient and kind. Well, God is patient and kind, etc. But I want to do it here. This is that passage from John 10. It should be, this is how God showed his love among us. But we're going to replace every word for God with love. This is how love showed love among us. Love sent love into the world that we might live through love. Love is the gate. Jesus is God, and God is love. Love is the entryway point. Whoever enters through love will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture, and there really is no room for any of our ulterior motives at all. We got to think about that. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy, and you and I both know that thieves in the church do that. People who have ulterior motives, They do kill and destroy people. They do. But this is what it says: love has come that they may have life and have it to the full. Friends, our motive matters. It really matters. And so as we go forward in faith, remember that getting anxious about finances, getting anxious about the future of organized church as it is, getting anxious about your own church building, wherever you are, whoever you work with, none of those things will ever matter as much as loving God in the community. I would ask you to think so carefully about your heart and about what matters to you, because I promise you, if we're willing to love our neighbor, then we will be doing what God calls us to do. And if God brings finances and we make it through this season and the spirit of Matthew 25 grows in the way that it has the potential to do so, well then yay! And if not, we have already been so effective. Incredibly effective, because people have come here and they have felt loved. They have known acceptance. We're getting to know families and children. They have learned already that when you're in trouble, you go to that church, and there are good and kind people there who will just love us. We've never baited and switched with Matthew 25 at all, and we can't start. We have to trust that God will provide what we actually need so that we can continue loving our neighbor in whatever way we're called to do so. Our motives matter. Consider your heart. I ask that you would pray through all these things. Friends, I think we have to decide how much we're willing to believe Jesus. How much we're willing to believe, not just in Jesus, but believe Jesus. In Jesus' words, that love is everything. Entering the gate through Jesus, entering the door through Jesus, means entering the door through love. Inviting people in with full love, generous, graceful, beautiful love. And whether or not they come to church on Sunday or watch online or ever even have the resources to put into the offering plate is totally secondary. Maybe What matters is that people know the love of Jesus, the love of God. What really matters is that people are able to live whole and holy lives in love with the Lord and ready to love their neighbor as well. That's what will change this world. So take care, everybody. I hope you have a good week. Again, reach out if you would like more information about any of this. No matter what you're a part of, I encourage you to prioritize loving God and loving neighbor. And I promise that will be the best way. Take care, everybody. Much love. I can't wait to see you again soon. We're having a great time. Take care.